It's the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. For more on the Seminoles, including Osceola's coverage from veteran Seminole insiders, message boards, Osceola virtual happy hours, and more, go to theosceola.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines podcast. My name is Patrick Burnham. I'm a football writer for the Osceola and the host of this podcast. Joining me today are Jerry Kutz, the owner and publisher of the Osceola, Bob Ferrante, the Osceola's managing editor, and former FSU offensive lineman and Osceola football analyst Mark Salva. And our special guest is former FSU linebacker coach Wally Burnham, who coached college football for over 50 years. And guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, Pat.
Thank you for being here.
Appreciate everybody taking some time out of their weekend to join us this morning. One of the things we're going to talk about today are the main topic of this show is going to be the previewing the linebacker position at Florida State as they head into 2020. A young linebacker core with plenty of potential. The first thing we want to talk about as we get into this is FSU is going back to a even front defense, a 4-3 defense under defensive coordinator Adam Fuller. And so, Coach Burnham, kind of what we want to get you to tell us, start off with before we start getting into personnel is kind of tell us about the responsibilities that each of the three positions have. Your Mike linebacker, which is your middle linebacker, your Sam or stud linebacker, which is your strong side outside linebacker, and your Will linebacker, which is your weak side outside linebacker. So let you start wherever you want to on that.
Well, good question and very complex. You could probably talk about these three positions all day and get different answers from different people. But basically in the 4-3, and we all know that the offenses today determine what kind of linebackers you recruit for different positions. It's not like when Mark played necessarily, even though it was beginning to come on the forefront. But let's just start with the Sam linebacker. He is Sam, nickel, whatever you want to call him. He's got to be a guy that can play in the box or he can play out in space. And that is very, very hard to find, let me tell you. So that's the reason everybody starts playing nickel, all right? That just kind of gives you a start on what you're looking for there. Your Mike linebacker has changed a little bit, even though he has got to be a strong run player. Because sometimes you leave 5 in the box, and a lot of teams will check the runs or quarterback draws and things like that. Plus, if you leave him in there and you're going to do a lot of blitzing, at times he's going to have to be man on the back. And that's a mismatch most of the time. But, you know, he's more of your throwback type linebacker still. Your middle linebacker is a guy that is kind of a mixture. But he's got to be a guy that can play in the box, just like your Sam does, and be out of the box playing in space. So you get a lot of different type people, but basically that's kind of what you're looking for, and without getting real specific.
Hey, Pat, I was wondering there, if I could, Wally, who do you think we have that's suited to those positions? I mean, but based upon Wally's description, who best suits that?
Well, you know, obviously it's Sam. You know, you look at Amari Gaynor. He's big, athletic, long, has the size to line up against the tight end and play inside the box, as Coach Burnham was talking about, but also has the athleticism to flip his hips and get out in coverage and he's fast enough he can take off a tight end one-on-one. You've got Kalen DeLoach, who's playing Sam and Will, but he's a guy also who can run very well, similar to not quite as tall and long as Amari, but he's certainly a guy that fits that bill. And then, of course, you move into Mike linebacker, and you've got Leonard Warner, who we've heard a lot of good things about. And as we found out last year, he is a much more productive inside in the middle of the defense than he was outside. Struggles a little bit in coverage. And then, of course, the two young guys that have heard so much about, Steven Dix and DJ Lundy. certainly seem to be physical downhill players based off what we saw in from their high school tape, and then what little we saw of Steven in spring ball. So then at the will linebacker, looks like you're going to have Emmett Rice, Jaleel McCray, and Jayon McCluster, even though they are cross-training some of these guys. But the guy that I'm really looking forward to seeing is Jaleel McCray at will. He's a guy that's extremely physical, runs very well, and looks like he can play the run or pass, as Coach Burnham was talking about. Coach Burnham, one of the things I want to ask you about, with the advent of all the RPO offense, run-pass options, how much more difficult is it to play linebacker today than it was, say, 20 years ago?
Well, I think it's mentally, it's really different. And, all your guys out there, your linebackers we're talking about, have got to be fairly smart football players, okay, to make all the adjustments and everything. With all the personnel groupings that people are playing this day and time, it's so hard to get all the adjustments. So defenses have started simplifying, and they've had to. And you either this day and time you're playing some type of quarters coverage in the secondary, which puts a lot of responsibility to any linebacker that's walked out in space. Or you're playing some kind of man free and blitzing someone. That seems to be the norm today, as you line up with those press corners and those kind of things, and you're blitzing people. And so that puts more responsibility on the linebackers as far as, let's just say your will linebackers out there on number 2, weak side, who's split out in the slot, and he's got man responsibilities. Well, these offensive coaches are being paid pretty good money also. So they see those kind of things, and they get those matchups. So that's really caused a lot of problems for the defense. That's the reason you're getting so many scores. That's the reason you're having so many yardage passing and rushing the football and things like that. So it's hard on those guys mentally as much as physically this day and time.
All right, well, that leads me to another question. One of the things that we've heard at Florida with the new staff, Coach Norvell, and the defensive side of the ball, is they're doing a lot of cross-training. They're training guys at multiple positions. But at linebacker specifically, 7 of the 10 scholarship players are sophomores or freshmen. How hard is it on a young linebacker to come in and learn 2 positions as complex as college offenses are?
Very hard. Very, very hard, in my opinion. Okay, let's take your will linebacker. Let's start there. He might be the guy, since you kind of think he's an in-the-box type player, but which he's not all the time because of the formations. You might can train him to be a Mike linebacker. But you can't take that Mike linebacker and make him a will linebacker or a Sam linebacker that's got to go out there and play in space. So you got to be selective in who you do that with. And just like Mark said earlier, as we were just talking in general, there's a lot of time involved in that. So when you go to your segment meeting and you're trying to cross-train somebody and at the same time coach them at their regular position, it becomes very difficult. And so there's a lot of time invested in those things that, 20-hour weeks. I don't know when they go on those kind of things, but that makes it harder. Now, I'm not saying we've done it in the past, and you have to at some point. It's according to what your depth is and who you play in and what all those kind of things. So it's difficult. Some kids can handle it mentally, some can't. They just can't. They don't have the experience sometimes. They don't have the ability sometimes. They don't get all into that second position as much as they do that first position because they want to be a first teamer. at somewhere. And if they got to give up time to their second team guy to go to learn, there's a lot of things involved that people just don't realize. But I realize and I understand what they're trying to do because I've been down that road.
Yeah, to Wally's point, I'd like to make this point too. Cross-training an offensive lineman compared to a linebacker is so different. A linebacker is so much harder because the skills that are required to play those three positions differ far greatly than they do for like maybe an offensive lineman. I can teach an offensive lineman the same footwork, same steps, and they'll pretty much apply in a lot of different situations. But you're asking a linebacker, you're asking a Sam linebacker to be removed from the box to play like a nickelback and then you're going to cross-train him to play like a downhill thumper. Those are two real specific skill sets. So there goes the difficulty. You're gonna gain something, you're gonna lose something whenever you start moving people around like that, and that's why we pay these coaches all this money. They got to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, another thing, I may add this to that. Mark was talking about the Sam linebacker. Well, you got all these great tight ends right now. Everybody's recruiting really good tight ends. Well, they're flexing them out and becoming slot players. All right, now that bigger, slower, not quite as good a cover guy is out there trying to play a coverage that, you got to check to most of the time to something. And so that causes the problems for that position in particular. And so all those things come into play, and it makes it real tough. And then you got the tight ends that line up on the line of scrimmage and they back off and become an H-back. And now what does that Sam linebacker do, or what does that Will linebacker do? And Mark remembers this, the old tight end trade, which you see some of it, but that changes the responsibilities on these kids. So it's very time consuming in the classroom and the meetings, and it's time consuming trying to work all those situations technique wise on the field.
Now, they're 2 weeks out from the start. 2 weeks from today, they'll kick off against Georgia Tech. When do you think, as a coach, or when for you as a coach, would you have quit the cross training, figure out where they best sit, what position they're best suited for? Is that something you would do first couple of weeks of camp, and then, hey, this is who you are, this is what you're going to play? And also, want to ask you, well, answer that question first.
Well, I think at some point you got to start getting ready for the season, and whatever it is you're going to do. And I think you could probably take it up to the week before the first game. You can keep working those kids, and if you think one's close and is going to be able to help you in a secondary type position. And so I think you can take it up. And if a kid's not playing a lot and on a Saturday, then you can keep working him at two positions.
All right, I got another question going back to that. Obviously, this was a very unique offseason, spring practice period for all of college football, but you have a new staff coming in on both sides of the ball, implementing new schemes. How difficult is it to try to implement those schemes over a Zoom meeting as opposed to an in-person meeting? Would you, in your opinion, would you get the same thing out of it in a Zoom meeting that you would a in-person meeting? And also, 7 of the 10 linebackers are sophomores or freshmen. How crucial was it missing that in-person time for these young players?
Oh, I think it's a real problem, because when you're in those meetings, you're sitting there face to face with that kid and watching his reaction to what you're trying to teach and how he's what kind of reactions he is. Is he taking notes? And there's a lot of different things that you can see there that you can't see on the Zoom. The Zooms, no doubt, if you didn't have those things this day and time, it would be, I can't imagine a team like Florida State having to go into a season not having some way of been able to get in touch with those kids, teach, even though the Zoom meetings, I see everybody's, when I see things that they all are very complimentary of the Zoom meetings. The kids are listening, they're attentive, and so forth and so on. But, if a kid is sitting in the back of the room and he's not really paying attention, a lot of times you can't tell that unless you're there with them. So I think it's a great thing. The Zoom meetings are great because it's the only two right now that they've had, like Florida State, up to this point, until they got them back in camp.
Hey, Mark, I want to ask you, obviously you worked with us last year. We watched the defense a bunch in the 3-4, back to a 4-3, particularly at linebacker from what you saw from Gaynor and Deloach and McCray last year, Emmett Rice, Leonard Warner. Why do you think the 4-3 best suits this group?
Well, I think this group especially, like I said earlier, they have very specific skill sets to me. I think Amari Gaynor was the best linebacker we had all year last year, and he did really well in space. I think Leonard Warner, and this is where I'll differ with you, Pat, is I think Leonard Warner might be the will. I mean, yeah, he was out there in space and he didn't do real well, but they're trying to play him like a nickel. He was out there. I think in this scheme he'll be more into the boundary on the short side of the field if he has to be removed out of the box. If they go to a 4 wide kind of situation, I think he can handle that. I think Emmett Rice is more of a downhill thumper. I think Emmett might be the Mike and Leonard be the will. But and McCray is a long, athletic guy. He flashed that. He can play in space. I just think for the skill sets that these guys have, they're more. It's more conducive to this scheme rather than trying to have Leonard Warner on a tight end, so to speak, and how they can apply pressure to. I just think it just fits better.
Well, Jerry, I know you're a big fan of the linebackers. Who are you looking forward to seeing out of this group, and what have you learned about these kids so far?
Well, like you guys, Gaynor to me was the high performer last year. He's got the highest ceiling, and we know his dad, and we've had a chance to get to know Amari as a high school football player here in Tallahassee. And he's that kind of high caliber person that you're looking for when you're building a program. And he appears to be totally bought in. I mean, he went from 205 to almost 225 or 30 right now. And he seems dialed in. His father's been very surprised by the maturity and likes the coaching he's getting from Marv. So that's a guy that you can really build a program on. I've had the opportunity to get to know a few of the other kids that are, in and about this linebacker position. There's a walk-on named Kerr that he just graduated. He works down at the booster office along with Kando and some of those other guys. And very personable kid. He's coming back for his 5th year, working on an MBA. He has a degree in finance already, and he's very much a leader, as you can be as a walk-on. But he's a really high-quality kid. I've gotten to know Deloach's parents, both mom and dad, and he comes from a family of collegiate athletes. Again, a guy that you can really hang your hat on. And going to give you consistent effort and lead. And, those are things we always talk about. When we're not talking about linebacker, we could be talking about offensive line. We always talk about the buy-in and the character of the kid. And I think this linebacker position, our fans don't realize it yet. But I think at the end of the year, we'll be talking about leadership and character because they have it in their genetics. And I think that's important.
What are your initial thoughts on this incoming group? I know you've obviously taught some people that have been impressed with what they've seen from these young kids in camp. But how are you excited about seeing Steven Dix and DJ Lundy in particular?
Well, some of the people I know that are really smart football guys have gotten to watch the practices, and they're just thrilled with what they're seeing. Both those guys that you mentioned are big physical characters, and we haven't had that at linebacker. I mean, our freshman class this year is probably better than we've brought in a while. Both are big and can run, and are athletes. I mean, if you look at Lundy, I mean, I always get excited about this, but he's an undefeated state heavyweight wrestling champion for 3 years. And, you know, he's got great hands, feet. I think they're going to use him on offense as a fullback, and I don't know how that'll slow down his progress as a linebacker. But that's exciting. And then you got a guy like Steven Dix who came out of a good program and is, you know, very highly regarded. And so can those freshmen win a playing time this year? And that'd be a question that Wally maybe can address. Is you've got two incumbents, and I think probably how they perform will dictate how much playing time the younger guys get. But they're certainly going to push those guys for playing time.
Bob, what are your thoughts on the linebacker group heading into the season?
I think overall we're having a really positive conversation about a position group that's been something of a liability in recent years. You know, let's remember the last Florida State linebacker to be drafted was Telvin Smith in 2013. You know, guys like Matthew Thomas went undrafted. Josh Sweat was drafted as a defensive end. Florida State just hasn't had that kind of talent that was developed and then productive. And the NFL guys said, hey, we see him as being someone we can develop further and plug in. I think we all feel like Amari Gaynor is the next big one to come out of Florida State, still has plenty of time to develop. Like you guys, I'm really curious about the youngsters. It sounds like they are very much pushing veterans like Warner and Rice. So do we see, you know, a Jaleel McRae? Do we see a Lundy or a Dix really pushing for significant playing time? I think you have to hope that even as you're playing the spread offense, the hurry up tempo offenses, that you can still get some substitutions in, you know, when the ball is on your sideline, and you can get some of those guys in so that you're keeping linebackers fresh. You know, it just feels like there's a lot of depth here and a lot of talent. And I just think that's really an overwhelming positive looking at this defense going into the fall.
Coach Burnham, a question back to you. Obviously, in a normal season, how many guys would you – I mean, you got the 20-hour week rule. You've only got so much practice time, so much meeting time. How many guys would you typically want to be prepared to play in a game, you know, a normal game, a game that's going to be tight, you know, hard fought? How many guys would you want to take into that game ready to play?
6, you know, if you had more, that would be great. But, you know, trying to get 6 people ready to play a football game that you know is going to be a tough assignment. You know, then you've always got to have, you know, another couple, maybe 1 or 2 other guys that you could just put in to finish a game or something. But if you can play 6 linebackers and if that Sam linebacker is not a nickel type player, then you know you're much better off having a DB out there or someone like a DB. But 6 would be the maximum probably that you can really count on.
And then, of course,
think about this too. Those are the same guys that are all on your punt team, on your kickoff team, running a lot of special teams. So they're getting a lot of snaps in.
Correct.
That plays a factor too.
Well, let me ask you both another question. You've both coached, obviously. All right, we've got now this COVID thing, and it came out earlier this week that LSU, I think Wednesday at practice, only had 4 offensive linemen available, either due to testing positive for COVID or contact tracing. You're 3 weeks into camp. because of COVID, would you have been more prone to make sure that everyone's getting scrimmage reps, or is that something that you address week to week as you know what your roster availability may or may not be?
Well, I think, during camp, you can get a lot of different practice scenarios, and you got a little bit more time. And, we used to keep some kids out there and give them extra reps during the camp. But once you get to the 20-hour thing, it's still going to be tough. But that probably, and I haven't given that a lot of thought because I'm not involved, but I think that's a good question that you're going to have to answer. And if you got two of your linebackers down, let's say, for this game, then, you're going to have some third-team guys that are going to be second team that are going to have to play for you. So, it's a catch-22. You got to give them time. You got to give them reps once the season starts, and that's hard to find sometimes unless you organize your practices so that, you can get some extra work with them at the end of practice.
And that's where we're at a huge disadvantage, because the more you do that, the more reps you're giving to your roster, the less time you have to drill down on specific things and get deeper into the playbook, because you got to kind of keep it simple and in order to evenly distribute the repetitions. Now, other teams that have had staffs for several years, there's carryover year to year, right? And so for us, we don't have that carryover. So if you're trying to prepare younger kids, you can spend more time with them and know your older kids well. They've been through this already. They know the playbook. We can catch them up really quick. We don't have that luxury, and that's where we're at a specific disadvantage.
Well, I think practice schedules will change with those kind of things. You got to prepare. You got to have a plan at least. Okay, if this happens, this is how we're going to try to prepare these kids a little extra time in practice and things like that. And I think that's important. We all know it's out there. The COVID's out there. We know it's going to happen, probably to every team to some degree. Hopefully not. I hope it's a clean season for everyone. But we know in the back of our minds that we got to be prepared for those situations and those things to come up. And it's going to be a big challenge to the coaching staffs to make sure that gets done.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Wally, nobody wants to hear this said, but should fans temper their expectations a little bit about not Florida State alone, but just overall the quality of the product that coaches will be able to put on the field as the season progresses?
I think so. I don't know what happened here to my computer, but I think people are going to have to realize these coaching staffs are going to have to adjust, and they're going to have to be patient and realize, and hopefully the real fans at Florida State and any other university will be smart enough, will know those kind of things are happening. If a kid doesn't play for a couple of weeks, he's probably in a protocol of something, not necessarily an injury. So those are the kind of things that people are just going to have to realize are going to happen. And if it costs a game, it just costs a game sometime, I guess,
So I just did an article talking about FERPA, which is privacy law. And in the past, we've had to deal with it when it involves an injury, where they can't release. They can tell you the guy's out of the game, but they can't tell you what the injury was. Now we have this, and they can't release the name of who's got COVID. They can't tell you what the injury is. And so if a guy's missing from a couple of weeks, it could be concussion protocol. It could be COVID. It could be a disciplinary issue. He tested positive on a drug test. He could have had a personal family situation that he had to go home for. But I think everybody's going to jump to the conclusion, well, it's COVID, And unfortunately, the coaches by law can't tell us and the media, and therefore there's going to be a lack of communication that is going to foster Twitter misinformation. It's an interesting situation coaches find themselves in. Is there anything we can do in the media to help the coaches or help our fans understand the challenges the coaches and players are facing?
Well, Jerry, here's the thing I see. The fans right now know or should know, and I think they do, these things are going to pop up, and if they can't get the true information because of the laws and governing, injuries and concussions and why they're out and so forth and so on, surely to goodness they're going to understand the situation that something's happened. And I don't know, Jerry, I don't know where you could, what you could do except, try to be as positive as you can at the situation.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Coach Burnham, I got one question for you concerning this year's defense, and then we're going to move a little bit back into your history with Florida State. But you've had a chance to watch Memphis play over the last several years. You have a son that coaches at UCF, and they played 3 or 4 times over the last 2 years. Does anything stand out to you about Memphis's style of play as it relates to either Mike Norvell or to Adam Fuller's defense?
Well, they were, what I remember about them, not really studying them or anything like that, they were always have been an aggressive type defense, and they've always seemed to have great edge rushers, and seems like that's a priority in their style of defense. Is they got those big, fast, athletic defensive ends. Y'all were talking earlier, as we were just talking before we went on, about, standing up in 2-point stance and this guy dropping, this guy, rushing and mixing it up. And I think they've done a good job with that. But overall, I can't really say a lot about their style because I don't know Coach Fuller and what he's done in the past.
Well, all right. This question is for Jerry, Bob, and Mark. You've got a young, talented group for the most part as far as just eligibility-wise. 7 of 10 are freshmen or sophomores. But out of this group, who are you most excited to see play this year? If you could name one player, just pick a guy that, hey, this is who I'm really looking forward to see play in 2020 at linebacker.
Oh, Amari for me. I just think he's ready to he's poised to take that next step, and I just saw so many good things from him last year.
Bob?
Yeah, I think it's either Lundy or Dix. Dix being praised for his instincts, and Lundy because of those wrestling skills and how does that translate and help him with leverage. So if you're picking up 2 of those young guys, I think it's Lundy or Dix for me.
Jerry?
Well, I'd go with Gaynor as the guy that, you expect to really step forward this year. And then I'm with Bob. There's that curiosity factor of the unknown, and which of the 2 guys that we haven't seen are going to step up.
Yeah, well, as you guys well know, I cannot wait to see Jaleel McRae. He popped last year. I think he's going to be a guy that, I could be very complimentary to Amari, either at will linebacker or Mike, wherever he ends up. But I cannot wait to see that kid play.
I will be most excited the first time I see a linebacker run downhill in the box, take on a block, and make a tackle. That will excite me beyond all belief.
Of course, Florida State has a storied tradition at linebackers going back to the 60s and 70s with Dale McCullers, Paul Porowski, and Reggie Herring, to name a few. But, Coach Burnham, during your time at Florida State, you coached 3 national award winners. Paul McGowan and Marvin Jones won the Butkus Award, and Marvin and Derrick Brooks won the Lombardi Award. Can you talk to us a little bit about what made those 3 guys special and a little bit about coaching those 3 guys?
Well, Pat, they all three were different type players, and they were all really, really good football players. They were easy to coach, and but I will start with Paul. Paul was one of the toughest, most aggressive, smart football players and team guy that I've ever coached, and he was a leader. He was a tough nut, and he's one of those kind of guys. He didn't say a whole lot. Scrappy was a very quiet kid. Even today, when I talk to him, he's still kind of quiet and not, really pushing any kind of agenda or anything like that. But when he spoke in that huddle or at practice, everybody around him listened to him. Because they knew he was doing his job. You go in and watch tape, and after practice or the next day before practice, and he was going all out and doing everything he could do to get better every day. So he had some limitations in pass coverage, just like a lot of us do. But as far as the run game, he was probably as good as any of the other two guys that we're going to talk about. So he was a really, really good football player and a good leader for us at that time. Then the next two, we'll start with Marvin. Marvin was an exceptional football player. Marvin had the ability to he was a stud type guy, but he could run too, and he was so into football. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He and Derrick both were always, and I could, I'd be up on the chalkboard and I'd be drawing or talking, making a point off the tape and going up there and pointing out certain things. And I'd turn around and they were writing. They were taking notes. They were very into it mentally, trying to get better. But going back to Marvin, I'll give you a couple of examples. His freshman year, we were having goal line scrimmage. Mark remembers this. You put the ball on the 3-yard line and you put the ball on the 1-yard line. We didn't start at the 4-yard line or 5-yard line like a lot of people did at that time. I don't know what they're doing now, but we practiced those two situations. Like if it's 3rd and 3, defensively you had to play run and pass. 4th and 1, everybody knew what was going to happen most of the time. So, but we put Marvin in at the end of goal line scrimmage real early. I don't know what, after pads came on, we put him out there just to see what he could do, how his reaction would be. And big William Floyd, the best I can remember, we're going to run 30, what was it, Mark?
34 wham with William Floyd.
Yeah. And Marvin split him down the middle. And everybody just kind of turned, players and coaches, and said, what just happened? And from that time on, Marvin.
I gotta say, I've never seen Wally Burnham so happy, and I've known him now, 30-something years, as the happiest I ever saw Wally Burnham.
Yeah, there was a lot of coaches happy that day. But from that point on, we knew Marvin was the real deal. And so from that time on, we started giving him more work in practice. And, of course, we all know the story, how that story ended. So Marvin was a great guy, always had a smile on his face, even when it was 2-a-days and we were going 15 to 17 periods in the morning and maybe 20, 21 in the morning and 15 or 17 periods in the afternoon back in when you really went 2-a-days. But he always had a smile. He was always ready. He was always ready to go practice and get better. Derrick was, I didn't have Derrick at first. He was a strong safety. And, we said, dang, we need to get him closer to the ball. He's a playmaker. And he was a very smart football player, very smart football player. He had the leadership qualities that Marvin had, that Paul had, so we started sending him to my drills part of the practice. And then he would stay with Mickey part of the practice to get to work at the strong safety. And so finally we made the decision, once we went to the 4-3, that he was going to be a Sam linebacker. And so that's where we started him, as a Sam linebacker. And he flourished out there because he understood coverages already. He could play outside the box. He could play the coverages and things like that. So they all had their specialties. And but all, Marvin and Derrick could really run. Paul was a thumper and a leader and those kind of things. And but they were so much fun to coach. They never were complaining about practice. They never were complaining about how long we were going to be out there, or how long we were going to meet. Those kind of things. They were completely all in. Even though we didn't have that term back in those days, they were all in to make our football team better. And people listened to those three guys. And I'll tell you one thing. I learned how to coach linebackers as much from listening to those three guys as I did in any other situation. They would come up with things that I had not thought about, and I was never will forget one night in a meeting during tour days, Marvin, I was always strict on stance. You had to have a good stance. You had to have a good first step. You had to do this and that. Your hands were here, your arms were here. And Marvin asked me one night in a team in a segment meeting, he said, "Coach, let me ask you a question." He said, "I watch tape and I see all these great tailbacks line up in the I backs or whatever, and they always got their hands on their thigh pads in their stance." And he said, "If I put my hands on my thigh pads and I get ready to take on a block, when I take that first, second, third, whatever step it is that I got to take on a block or make a tackle, then my hands and my arms are already halfway up from where you had me have them to start with." He said, "I'm quicker that way." So from that day on, that's how I started teaching the stance in the linebackers. Marvin Jones taught me that. So it was those kind of things that made it a really great atmosphere, or a real good relationship. I never had a problem with either one of those kids over anything.
Well, your relationship with those two guys has continued throughout, the last 30 years. Want to ask you, we've had Marvin on several times on our happy hours. He has not been elected to the College Football Hall of Fame somehow. Can you give us your thoughts on how that could possibly be? He might be the greatest inside linebacker in college football history. How's he not in the College Football Hall of Fame?
Well, I think that's a shame. I think Marvin Jones is well-deserving on what he did on and off the field. And I don't understand it, and I don't know what can be done about it, from the local, PR part of it. But there's no doubt that he would be in the top three of anyone that's ever played inside linebacker in collegiate football.
Well, also, you had one of your former linebackers, Derrick Brooks, going to the NFL Hall of Fame, and Derrick actually had you in Canton for that event. Can you tell us what it was like to watch one of your former players get inducted in the most famous club in football history?
It was very exciting. Barbara and I went up and spent the weekend and didn't get to spend a whole lot of time with Derrick, of course, because he was in all these public relations type guys. But, to sit there in that audience and watch Derrick walk up on that stage and receive that gold, yellow, whatever colored jacket they received was one of the proudest moments of my coaching career. And I will always be appreciative of Derrick inviting me to that special moment in his career. And you got to be at the right time, at the right place, and all those kind of things. And fortunately for me, with those three guys, I was at the right place at the right time.
All right, guys, I want to thank you for joining me today. Thank you to Coach Burnham and Mark for joining us to talk a little bit about linebacker play. And just like everyone else, I'm looking forward from 2 weeks from today when we're taping this, when Florida State takes on Georgia Tech, and we get to take a look at this young linebacker crew and what Chris Marv has been able to do with them. And we will look forward to talking again next week on episode 6, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast. We would like to thank everyone for listening to the Osceola Seminole Sidelines podcast. If you're not an Osceola subscriber and would like to access our premium content, which currently features stories on running back LaDainian Webb and linebackers Leonard Warner and Kalen DeLoach, as well as an Osceola video chat on FSU's two-man quarterback battle heading into the Georgia Tech game, please go to the subscribe tab at the top of theosceola.com's main page and go to the discount code field and enter FSU20 to receive a 20% discount off our annual rate of $74.95. We hope you like the podcast and look forward to you becoming a member of the Osceola. Thanks for listening.
This has been another edition of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. To subscribe to the Osceola, go to theosceola.com. Go Noles!